Hello friends, welcome to this video. Today I thought we could make some art together, do a bit of cutting, a bit of collage. So a few videos ago I mentioned this book called Make Art Every Day by Marianne Duchamp. And I said that I'd pick a project and we could do it together. So I've picked a project called Offcuts, which is the kind of art making exercise which I really enjoy. It's taking offcuts from previous projects, collage, reusing, reimagining, and creating something new with the byproducts of previous art experiments. And I'm going to share her suggestions and her instructions, and then hopefully along the way I can also share some of my own thoughts about this kind of project. So it's called Offcuts, and she's made 8 collages from simple offcuts of coloured paper. So she's called this No Waste Collages. So here she says, I'm inspired by the paper cuts of Matisse and the handmade books of the Russian avant-garde of the early 20th century. Their work looks effortless and free. In these images opposite, I used discarded pieces of coloured paper from other projects to make some collages. I tried to emulate the spontaneity of these artists and their playfulness. So the creative exercise, and these are her instructions. So she says to collect some coloured paper, discarded or otherwise, cut up into random shapes. Cut up 6 rectangles of the same colour as background, as the substrate for our collages. And then she says, now playfully arrange the cut out paper onto those rectangles until you're happy with your compositions. So really we're taking 6 background pieces and then we are placing cut out pieces of coloured paper onto those backgrounds to make a pleasing composition. So she shares a little wisdom and creative inspiration and artists for us to have a look at. So she says paper cuts of Matisse and books by Russian avant-garde artists like Natalia Goncharova and Alexandra Rodchenko. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to gather some background pages. Marianne has used some plain grey paper. I'm not sure I've got any plain coloured paper, so I'm going to see what I've got. And then we're just going to use our scissors to cut up some offcuts and random shapes and see if we can arrange them on our background piece of paper. And I think the lovely thing about projects like this is that they get our creative juices flowing, and we have to find that lovely sweet spot between total play and a little bit of thought. So before I start cutting out shapes, I just wanted to show you inside this sketchbook. This is a sketchbook of mine from a couple of years ago. I've just drawn a simple grid, and then in every box I have created a shape for my imagination. So I'm just looking at some of these shapes as an inspiration for when I start cutting. And I also just wanted to show you these pages here. So these pages are all made by cutting out random shapes from a magazine and then arranging them on a page in a composition that I find pleasing. And I often find that whenever I'm cutting out shapes with no real plan, there are certain types of shapes that just keep appearing. There are certain motifs that I'm drawn to. So I'm always drawn to vases and jugs and vessels and plates and bowls, and this kind of shape often appears when I'm cutting out, as do leaf shapes and organic shapes. And I think it's only through practice and only through doing this kind of exercise that we find our own visual language. You don't have your own sort of arty offcuts, or you don't have bits of pieces lying around from your art practice, then you can do a very similar thing by taking pieces out of a magazine. And for my substrate, for the base of my collages, I've cut up a piece of paper which is 250 GSM, and it's actually an old painting that I've painted over with some blue paint. So some of the remnants and echoes and history of the painting is still on the background, but it was the nearest thing I had to hand for a plain background. So that's what I'm using. And then I've gathered together some just bits and pieces of offcuts and oddments. So some of them have got some of my drawing on, some have got a bit of watercolour, a bit of acrylic paint, and I've tried to have a mix. I'm going to cut out some shapes from these pieces with my scissors, And I'm actually not going to stick them down. I'm just going to think about this as a temporary collage and take photographs when I have finished so that I can play around with the different shapes. And I think this kind of exercise is just a really useful one for trying to get to grips with composition, thinking about what we like, what kind of shapes we like, how they interact with each other, how we take a blankish space and try and make it interesting and exciting to us just with some simple shapes. And often this sort of task is simple but not easy. It's actually quite mentally challenging to arrange shapes on a piece of paper and get them to work. So it's a good one for kind of getting our creative juices flowing. And I really enjoy the philosophy that Marion shares in this book about being playful and having a sense of discovery and a sense of curiosity and trying small creative tasks as a way to discover things, as a way to build momentum, but in a low pressure, low expectation sort of way. So we're not trying to create a masterpiece, we're trying to learn through doing. We're trying to discover little aha moments and little beautiful things about our own artwork through playing. And play is such a generative way of discovering things. It's how we learn to navigate the world, isn't it? And I think it's really helpful to have these sort of small creative tasks to get us going and sometimes inject something new and exciting into our existing art practice. It keeps things fresh, it keeps things exciting, it leads us down new avenues, it gives us a new stepping stone to the next thing. And the thing about art making is we never quite know how things are going to turn out. And so we have to have that spirit of adventure when we are creating. And it just makes creating more enjoyable too, to not have really high expectations about having to create something meaningful. You know, we can actually bring that sense of play into our creativity, and I think it can be a wonderful thing. I've got 5 pieces of collage on each of these 8 background pieces. I haven't arranged them, I've literally just sort of plonked them and haven't thought about composition. So I've taken the pieces that I'm making collage out of and I've cut one for here, 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 one for here. So for example, they all have a piece of this painted pink acrylic in different shapes, the shapes that just sort of came out of my imagination. So triangles and bowl shapes and sort of vase or vessel shapes. So each one has got a pink piece, each one has got a piece with pencil scribbles. So here I've cut a sort of flower and another vessel shape. And the things that I've thought about so far, I wanted there to be something dark and something light on each background. I wanted to vary the size. For example, on this piece, I've got a little teardrop shape here and much larger shape. So I was thinking about varying the size and varying the colour. If I've got something very curvy, then maybe having also something a little angular. But that's as much as I've thought about it. And now the fun happens. How to take something like this and arrange the pieces in a way that I like the composition. And it just involves quite a lot of moving and faffing and reflecting. And it might be that I like it with a piece removed. I find this kind of exercise quite a mindful sort of exercise, just trying to work out how to take a random selection of coloured pieces and create something really pleasing. And it could be playing with the space in between things. So I quite like the shapes that have been created in the interspace or the negative space, the sort of space behind the shapes. So I might experiment with overlapping, with turning the shapes around. And it might be that I end up swapping pieces around. I think there is something good about working on 6 or 8 or 4 at the time. It means that you don't become too precious. There's a sort of flow. You can move, if you get stuck with one, you can move to the next.
I'm hushing the dog on the chain. I'm lining up stones on the edge of the bank. Rally the troops for another refrain. I sing this softly to myself. I sing this softly to myself.
So this is where I've ended up for now. I'm not going to stick them down. I'm going to take photographs and see what I think when I'm looking at them in a photograph. And I might play around with them some more. I've abandoned some of my cutouts. I took some pieces away. This little example here has only got 3 pieces of collage on it, but I liked their sort of interaction and the way that they created an interesting space. And it's amazing that you can just move a piece of paper a little bit and completely change the composition. So I thought it was useful to have dark and light, some plainer pieces with some patterned pieces, some angular pieces with some more curvy pieces. But it's one of these tasks that you could revisit again and again. So there we go. I hope you enjoy that exercise if you choose to do it. I'm not sure I was quite as spontaneous as perhaps Marion suggested that I should be, but it's an interesting creative puzzle, really, and it really made me think. It made me slow down. It was quite mindful and meditative, and there was just something quite lovely about taking some old scraps of paper and reimagining them into something new, which I really relished and enjoyed. So I hope you enjoy that too.